Welcome to the JMJ Commercial Realty Podcast. Dive into market insights, winning strategies, and the stories shaping today's commercial real estate landscape. Let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 4 of the JMJ Commercial Realty Podcast. My name is Adam Schertzer. I'm an advisor at JMJ Commercial Realty, and I'm here with the broker of JMJ Commercial Realty, Josh Cedia. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing great. How you doing today, Adam?
Good, good. So I know in the last episode we talked about the process of leasing commercial property. So this episode we're going to talk about the process of buying commercial property. And I know there's probably a lot of people out there listening that maybe you bought a commercial property, maybe you are leasing right now for your business and you're interested in purchasing commercial property. So I think this could, be pretty helpful for you. So let's just jump right into it. Just want to let everyone know that we are based in Massachusetts, so anything we say and do in the court of podcast world has to do with Massachusetts purchasing commercial property. Maybe you do it different where you are. I know even New Hampshire does it different from Massachusetts. So we'd love to hear from you. If you do it a little bit differently that we do it here, maybe we'll even have you on and we can talk about how you do it in your state. But for now, we are all about Massachusetts. So let's get started with just finding out, what kind of approach, if someone comes to us and says, "Hey, I want to buy a commercial property," how do we even get started?
Yeah, so really important we take a consultative approach. So just like in our last episode when we were talking about leasing, we really want to try and understand our clients, understand, their situation, specifically what they're looking for, and really try and gear our efforts towards, what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, a big part of that is, asking them all the questions like we did with a lease, a lot of the same type of the questions, and starting with, what type of commercial property do you want? I mean, do we help people purchase all types of commercial properties or just one?
Yeah, we're generalists. So we help with office, retail, industrial, land, all different types of things.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's multi-unit housing. We're talking like apartment buildings. So there are many different types of commercial properties, and trying to look at, especially if you're a user of the space. Let's say it's office, and you're going to be using it for your business purposes. Important to get a better idea of how many people are going to be using the space, and how much parking do you need, and what's your budget, and those types of things. So
Hmm.
the location, a lot of
Yeah. And I think like you said, I think a lot of it depends on what they're going to be using it for, whether it's a user. We see people that are looking to invest. They're just looking to, try to get an extra bit of cash flow, maybe build some equity in real estate. What are some other things besides maybe an investor or a user? Is there anything else that someone might come in and say why they're purchasing commercial property?
Yeah, sometimes it's a developer. Sometimes a developer might come in and say, "Oh, I'm looking for opportunities. I may, be looking to, I might have a specialty in hotels, and I want to be able to add to my portfolio." Or um, maybe it's someone who we talked about. I think it was episode 1 or 2 about billboards or other types of things. So there might be a very niche type of situation. But again, every client is different in terms of their risk tolerance, their budgets. Can they purchase something for cash? Are they going to be looking to have lending? Look to a commercial lender to be able to make a purchase. So it really
Mhm.
depends.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to commercial properties, you can have a standalone building, but you could also have a condo, which I didn't know about this till I started working in commercial real estate, that you can have a commercial condo, where I think most people think condos, you think of someplace you live. So what's the difference between those two types of commercial properties?
Yeah, a commercial condo can be a really nice option for someone. Let's say they're focused on their business. They really don't want to deal with a lot of things that upkeep for a property. So with a commercial condo, you typically have professional management. So you're paying a condo a monthly fee often for having a professional manage the condo. They take care of the maintenance on the property, if there's repairs, different things, for more kind of common areas outside of your unit typically. And you have a proportional amount that you're responsible for. So you may have 1,000 square feet. It's maybe a smaller size condo, and it represents 1% of the whole condo association. And so if, let's say, a new roof is needed, if it was a standalone building, you'd be responsible for that whole cost of the roof. But if it's a condo, then typically, if it was just 1% or 2%, it would just be that proportional share that you're responsible for. So it's a nice way to have professional management and, you know, shared costs for certain things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think at least I've seen it, it's usually a lower price point to get into, a commercial condo, whether it be for an investment or for your own business. I've had clients recently where we've started out looking to lease a space. And then, I brought up some properties, it's like, oh, for that same price that you can lease, maybe you could purchase something. And they didn't even know that that was an option, to purchase a smaller commercial condo. Um, so I think that's a great thing to be aware of.
Yeah, keep in mind, I just want to say with a commercial condo, though, you have rules and regulations for the condo association.
Mm,
Sometimes they may say, you need to have permission from condo owners for, a certain thing or
hmm
right of first refusal if you're selling. So that it can limit, in some ways, it can be a little limiting versus if you just own your own property. So I just want
Yeah.
to distinction.
Similar to buying a residential condo to purchasing a house. Um, yeah, same type of things to be aware of there. Um, so I know one of the, probably biggest questions that we ask people looking to buy something is size. Whether you want, the size of the building to be a certain size, or maybe you don't even need a building. Maybe you just need, an acre or two of land. I had someone reach out recently. They were just looking for parking for trucks. So they just need either a dirt lot, paved lot, something like that. Um, so when you go to see a listing, how do you see those things, building size versus lot size or acres?
Yeah, it's important to understand, again, going back to understanding what your client's looking for. Sometimes having a building, if we're using the parking example, sometimes having a building on a lot may not be so beneficial for that client because the price that the seller is selling it for might be a lot higher because they've improved that land by having a nice building on there. The buyer might say, I don't want that at all. I've just, it's an expense to me. I need to take down that building and I want to use the full lot size for parking. Whereas if it was an office user, let's just say it was an office building, they might think it's great. It's a large size lot. There's a lot of parking for people. There's already a building there. Maybe there's a value add situation, value add meaning that they can improve, still, make some upgrades, change some different things. So it really depends on the client situation.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, every situation is different. And that's what I really enjoy about this job too, is that, you know, it's no two clients' needs are the same, and being able to understand their needs and trying to match them with the best property. Um, so say we found a property, who else are the players kind of in this that they should either have in place to work with besides, a commercial real estate agent, or um, when they're going through the process, or maybe even before the process, to have this kind of lined up so they're in a better position when they do find that property.
Yeah. Well, it's important for a buyer, I would say, to understand if, from a, let's say, a zoning side, can they do the type of business that they want to do there?
Hmm.
Sometimes we might have, like, I'm thinking of a landscaper, for example. We've helped landscapers where they really love the location, but it's not an appropriate place where they can conduct their business. So sometimes they're talking with a town or a city, the building department, to see if they can do what they want to do there. But if they've decided, that things look promising for a location, then a lot of times they're, um, you know, putting together an offer. We help them with putting together an offer, and they'll have an attorney that they use. They'll talk with their lender. They may have an inspection done, an appraisal. The bank. There's different. If they're doing financing, and a bank will want to have an appraisal done. So there's a lot of different people that kind of come to the table during a purchase process.
Yeah, so I know when, you typically buy a house or you put an offer in on a house, a lot of times they want to see like a pre-approval letter from the bank or pre-qualified or things like that. Is there something similar with commercial real estate, or is it like a proof of funds or, a commitment from the bank to say, okay, yeah, they can buy this or they have the funds for it. How does that work?
Yeah. I think from a seller perspective, they really just want to see that the buyer um, is going to be able to perform. They're going to be able to go ahead and purchase the property. And so sometimes the seller will say, I want to see proof of funds. You say that you're going to put X amount of dollars down. I want to see a bank account that has at least in excess of X dollars. Or, maybe with an offer, there's a letter from their bank saying that they're pre-approved or they have, you know, they're in good shape from the bank side of things to move forward. The bank may not issue a formal commitment, but that they've at least talked to the bank about that property and they want to move forward with it. Um, so sometimes there are things that you can put with your offer that help to strengthen that, especially if it's a competitive situation. Maybe it's a new property that came out. You might have multiple offers on it. If you can, um, show strength as a buyer, that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I don't know if we're jumping ahead here, but yeah, when you're submitting that offer, more than just the price and the terms, I think something I've learned from you is to always ask the listing agent, what's the most important thing to the seller?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's not always price. Maybe it's a quick closing. Maybe they need, they want to close in X amount of days, or maybe, it there was one I had recently, which was a commercial condo, and there was a tenant there, and the owner of the property had a really good relationship with the tenant and wanted to make sure that they could stay there, you know, for at least the rest of their lease and possibly longer if they wanted. So being aware of those type of situations, I think can really help you stand out when you're submitting offers.
Yeah, and if you don't ask those questions early on, you won't know what's important to the seller, whether you're asking the agent or you're asking the seller directly. But being able to understand that and then craft an offer, assuming that it works for the buyer, that is something that can really be helpful for your client, for your buyer, if you're representing the buyer.
Yeah, definitely. So with this in mind, say, the transaction goes through everything great, compared to leasing where we talked about, how commercial agents get paid or how we get paid in these situations. Is it the same with purchasing? Different? How does that work?
It's a little different. So typically, with a sale, you'll receive a commission at the closing. A lease could be something that, payments might be over a period of time that you're receiving payments, or maybe at a renewal, like we talked about last episode, if there was an option, there might be a commission for the initial term, but then a different amount for a renewal. So it's whatever is agreed to between buyer and seller, but typically there's a certain amount or percentage that is at least in Massachusetts here, that's at the
Mhm.
closing, that you receive that amount at the
Yeah.
closing.
So kind of similar to, a residential closing or something like that, where it's at the end. Um, so say someone comes to us and says, I'm looking to purchase this type of property in this location. How do we get started helping them with stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, we really, are it's important to have kind of an exclusive situation typically with buyers, because sometimes, if you're putting in a lot of time and effort and energy working with a buyer, sometimes you run into situations where a seller says, I'm not paying any type of fee. And we may find an ideal property for the buyer, but it's an off-market transaction. It's not something that's listed. And so if a seller says, I'm not paying any commission, that could be kind of a tricky situation. If, the buyer doesn't pay or the seller doesn't pay, you're kind of in the middle there. So we typically kind of have some sort of exclusive arrangement working with buyers and then try and, like I said, really understand, what the situation is, as we identify properties. And it could be from relationships that we have with other agents. It could be listed properties, off-market properties, all different types of things.
Mm.
But assuming that, a specific property is a great fit for the buyer, it then leads to an offer to purchase. So we would prepare an offer with different terms that would then, be submitted for over to the seller for review.
Mhm. So speaking of off market, if people aren't sure what that means, so I assume that's something that's not listed anywhere. Someone might, I might own a building, but I wasn't really thinking of selling it, or I don't have it listed. How do we find out that there's someone out there who might want to sell it? How do we find out about these type of opportunities?
Yeah. So sometimes let's just say, if it's cold calling, right? We might work with a buyer and they have a very specific criteria. They might want, you know, a 50,000 square foot building with X number of acres lot for what they're trying to do. Um, and we have different services that we use where we can, through public records or other ways, be able to identify like what are the buildings that are out there within a certain radius, and come up with a list, whether they're on the market, off the market, listed or not listed, and then reach out to those property owners and say, we're working with a client. The client's interested in this type of a property. Would you be open to selling, and see kind of where the conversation goes?
Hmm.
It's just one example. So
Yeah. No, it sounds good. So it's nice to, you know, have those resources, because someone looking on their own who's not a, commercial agent might not be able to do that. Um, so another one of the benefits of working with a commercial real estate agent.
mhm.
Um, so how do so say we find the property, you get it, as far as showings go, how does that work? Similar to residential, where, are there open houses for commercial properties? Is it more appointments? Is it?
Yeah, it depends. You may have a commercial owner who says, I don't want any of the tenants to know that I'm considering selling this property. So, they may want to have a confidentiality agreement signed by the buyer before they send anything over. It may be a situation where it's vacant, and, it's not like an open house in residential where you have a lot of buyers coming in all at once to look at a property. It's usually appointment based. Sometimes a listing agent may have like a broker open house at a property just to let people know about it. But generally with commercial, it's just separate appointments that are set up for the buyer to take a look at if the seller is comfortable doing that.
Yeah, and I know definitely if the property still has a business there, especially if it's, someone leasing the space that might not know that the landlord is planning to sell. A lot of times they'll, put in the notes, say, please do not walk the property, do not go in without an appointment. Um, like you say, because you don't want maybe your tenant knowing at that time yet that, you're planning to sell, and then it sends them into a panic that they need to find another place and things like that. So definitely a little bit different than, with residential properties. Uh,
Right. And sometimes I was just going to say, sometimes the seller will say, I don't want any signs up at the property that says it's for sale. Maybe they are
hmm.
okay with doing some online marketing, or maybe it's, just kind of very discreet situation. So sometimes having those relationships, with other commercial agents or other people can be really helpful, in identifying, what properties can
Yeah,
be. It's a little
def
different.
definitely. Yeah, I can think of two, some where we've had where there's a business there that the seller owns the business, and yeah, they don't want their customers to know that they're selling yet. And then, their customers be like, oh, are they going out of business? Are they moving? Are they, you know, so yeah, not having the signs up that people can see, compared to, imagine, with homes, most people would want a sign in front of their house. So everyone walking by, or their neighbors or things like that, will be able to see that. Um, so after, you find the place, you submit your offer, you get all that stuff in there. What happens after that offer is accepted on the property?
Yeah, so it depends on how the offer is structured, but typically there's a due diligence period. So it might be a week, might be a couple weeks, might be a couple months, depending on the complexity. but there's a period of time where the buyer will do an inspection. You don't have to, but typically it's good for them to do an inspection, and they'll be able to talk with their maybe attorney about the property, and their attorney's looking at different things related to the property. The seller oftentimes is producing any information that they have on the property for due diligence, kind of their time, the buyer's time to inspect things. And then during that due diligence period, oftentimes the seller's attorney is preparing a purchase and sale. So you move, at least in Massachusetts, you move from an accepted offer to a purchase and sale agreement. And the purchase and sale, kind of like the lease where you had that letter of intent or RFP, request for proposal, the purchase and sale is a much more detailed document like the lease. And it's a binding document, and it really kind of spells out a lot of different things, much more so than just an offer to purchase. So at the end of the due diligence period, you're typically going towards the signing of the purchase and sale. And at the signing of the purchase and sale, there's a much larger deposit that goes into escrow. At the acceptance of offer, there's usually like a small amount, might be $1,000 or some generally minimal amount that goes into escrow, showing that the buyer is serious to move forward with things.
And as far as getting inspection, are there inspectors that, work primarily with commercial real estate compared to, residential? Can you look for a commercial inspector? How does
Yeah,
that work?
yeah. I mean, generally, it's good to have someone that has, commercial experience to look out for certain things. But I've found that a lot of inspectors tend to do commercial and residential.
Hmm.
Sometimes you find just a commercial inspector. I don't know what your experiences have been, but usually I see commercial and residential.
Yeah, I'd say the ones I've seen that some would just do residential, but if they do commercial, they probably do residential as well. But I would definitely advise, finding someone who has experience with commercial, because I think that depending on the property too, you might have some different aspects. Um, whether it be, heating, boiler systems or things like that, or just the overall structure of, the property that you're looking at.
Yeah.
And I mean, we always, advise our clients whether they want to do it or not to get an inspection. I know I had one where the deal actually fell apart because of the inspection. I had a client who was all set to purchase this commercial condo. They're like, "Yep, we're going to do it regardless of, any inspection." They didn't want to pay whatever the X amount of dollars was for the inspection. And I said, "Well, it's an older building. You haven't seen the whole building. It's probably a good idea." And they went ahead and did it. The inspector found, quite a few issues. It was definitely fixable, but it was stuff that the the buyer, my client, wasn't aware of. We came back to the table, tried to renegotiate, asked for some of these things to be fixed. The seller wouldn't budge, and my buyer decided it wasn't a good time to move forward. So I think in that case, that the money that he spent on the inspection was well worth the time and energy went into it. And then, a couple months later, we were able to find another property that I think was a better investment. So it worked out in the long run.
Mhm.
Uh,
Absolutely. And you mentioned about having someone who has experience with commercial inspections. I would say the same thing on the legal side of things,
mm,
having someone who has experience as a commercial attorney. There are many different types of law that someone can practice, but having someone that has experience on the commercial side is really important.
mhm. Yeah, and definitely working with an attorney that has experience with purchasing property in real estate. I think there's, a lot of attorneys out there that maybe try to do everything. But I think if you can find one that does specialize in commercial real estate, I think the whole process will go a lot smoother.
Yeah.
So once you get that done, you're through your due diligence period, you sign your P&S. Is there anything else after that? You know?
Yeah, so typically if someone is borrowing money, they're working with a commercial lender. The lender will want to see that purchase and sale, and they'll have an appraiser come out to kind of determine value separate from the bank, an appraiser to kind of see what they determine it to be worth, because you're borrowing their money, and then there's some different things that happen between the purchase and sale and the closing. So, for example, there's like title. You want to make sure that the seller actually owns the property, that there's not any issues, and there's other um, things that can come up along the way. Each deal is a little different, so it's hard to say generally, but um, from what I've seen, from the signing of the purchase and sale to getting like a mortgage commitment from a bank, assuming someone's not borrowing money versus just paying for it in cash, it usually takes about a month or so. And then the closing itself is maybe a couple weeks later, a week or two later after the mortgage commitment.
So in a case where someone was paying all cash and didn't need that, it would probably go a lot quicker.
Yes.
Close quicker.
Yeah. But there could be things like the bank may want to have a 21E, so environmental. Here in Massachusetts, they want to just check to make sure there's no environmental issues with the property. So that could be something that they're ordering between purchase and sale and closing, just to make sure that that's all set. There could be some other items that come up. I just was working with a property recently. It was a historic property, so wanted to make sure things were kind of cleared up on that front, in terms of uh, just other. Each deal is different. There could be a lot of nuances as you get to closing, and then at the closing or the day of the closing or a couple days before, typically the day of, someone will want to do a final walkthrough, just the buyer, to make sure everything looks good before they go ahead and purchase the property.
Yeah, makes sense. Then everyone signs on the dotted line, you hand over the keys, and we're done.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
good. I think that's, it's definitely a quick overview of, purchasing commercial property. I'm sure that, we didn't touch on every little detail. If you do have any questions, comments, feel free to reach out to us, either through, the platform that you're listening on or watching us on, or you can reach us at podcast@jmj-cre.com. And we want to thank you for listening. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be with us. Thank you, Josh, for all of your insights. And we hope you tune in next time to episode 5, which has not been named yet, but I think, we've covered a lot of the basics of what we do. So I think coming up the next couple episodes, we'll probably do a little bit of a deeper dive into, some of the situations that we might run into in commercial real estate. So,
Awesome. Yeah.
all
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
All right. Bye, guys.
All right, take care.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the JMJ Commercial Realty podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of JMJ Commercial Realty or its affiliates. The information provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or real estate advice. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals regarding their specific real estate or business needs. JMJ Commercial Realty makes no representations or warranties as to the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of any information discussed. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is done solely at your own risk. By listening, you agree that JMJ Commercial Realty and its representatives shall not be held liable for any losses or damages resulting from the use of information shared.